So 250 years ago, right now, the revolution was well underway. The American Revolution had been started. The Continental Congress was meeting in this building, Independence Hall. And one thing I've been doing every day is just checking letters that the Founding Fathers wrote back and forth to each other. So I figured I'd check today and see if I find anything interesting and share it with you. I've got my laptop right here. So I'm gonna be looking down and checking for letters. Okay, so we're gonna do the letters from June 29th, 1775. There are 3 letters from the Founding Fathers to read today. The first is George Washington to George Washington from the Delaware delegates, to George Washington from Richard Henry Lee, and New York Provincial Congress to the New York delegates to the Continental Congress. Interesting. So maybe what looked like 2 official documents and 1 actual letter. So let's click into them and see what they look like. Okay, let's just take them in order. So the first one is to George Washington from the Delaware delegates, 29th of June, 1775. From the Delaware delegates, Philadelphia, 29th of June, 1775, recommended the bearer, John Parke, who, quote, is an ensign in the 2nd Battalion of the militia here, and is desirous of serving his country as a volunteer under you. He has frequently drawn his pen and is now resolved to draw his sword in support of the American cause. End quote. So there's a little explanation in Thomas Kean's writing. The letter is signed by Caesar Rodney and Thomas Kean, the 3rd member of the Delaware delegation. George Reed was temporarily absent from the Continental Congress on this date. Footnote number 1. John Parke of Kent County, Delaware, was a former law clerk of Thomas Kean. He was appointed Assistant Quartermaster General of the Continental Army on the 16th of August, 1775, and served in that position with the rank of Major until 29th of June, 1776, when he became Lieutenant Colonel of a regiment of artificers. He subsequently served in Colonel John Patton's additional Continental Regiment and resigned from the Army in October 1778. In 1786, Parke dedicated a volume of poetry to George Washington. Next, let's read to George Washington from Richard Lee, Philadelphia, 29th of June, 1775. Dear Sir, nothing material has occurred since you left this place, except the imperfect accounts we have of the Charlestown battle, which upon the whole seems to have nothing favorable to our great cause but the loss of Dr. Warren. To an infant country it is a loss indeed to be deprived of wise, virtuous, and brave citizens. I hope, however, still to hear that our enemies have lost characters very useful to them. We received the account of this engagement late on Saturday evening last, and a few of us immediately applied to and prevailed with the committee of this city to dispatch 90-odd quarter casks of powder to the camp, which I hope will arrive safe and in good time. We are this day informed in Congress that the 6 nations and Canada Indians are firmly disposed to observe a strict neutrality, and I think we shall endeavor to cultivate their friendship. The Congress has been engaged these 2 days about the mutiny and military regulations, and at last we shall adopt those of Massachusetts with very few alterations. You will see that we have again taken up the business of entering Canada and have left the proprietary of it to General Schuyler. If it may be done in a manner agreeable to the Canadians, it will certainly shut the door against dangerous tampering with the Indians on all our western frontiers. Nothing has yet been done about a military hospital, and I suppose we shall wait for your return of the state of the army. Dr. Shippen says that 3 young gentlemen here, perfectly competent, will be ready when called on to serve in the capacity of surgeons. I have only to assure you that it will always make me happy to hear from you, and that I am, with great regard, dear sir, your affectionate and obedient servant, Richard Henry Lee. The cover includes the notation, quote, favored by General Gates, end quote. Richard Henry Lee of Westmoreland County, Virginia, was first elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1758, the same year that George Washington first became a Burgess, and the 2 men subsequently served together not only in that body, but also in the first 2 Virginia conventions and both Continental Congresses. A son of one of Virginia's oldest and proudest families, Lee bitterly resented Parliament's encroachments on colonial rights. During the Stamp Act crisis, he emerged as a leading defender of those rights and began a lifelong political alliance with Patrick Henry, whose stirring oratory he complemented with his own considerable oratorical skills. In the Continental Congress, Lee became deeply involved with the problems of Confederation and diplomacy. Poor health caused him to give up his seat in 1779, but he later regained political prominence as an anti-federalist. Footnote number 1. Although the Continental Congress received a brief report about the Battle of Bunker Hill on 22nd of June, it did not learn of Dr. Joseph Warren's death on the battlefield until 11 p.m. on Saturday, 24th of June, at which time John Adams said, 100 gentlemen flocked to our lodgings to hear the news. At 1 o'clock, Mr. Hancock, Mr. Samuel Adams, and myself went out to inquire after the committee of this city in order to beg some powder. We found some of them, and these, with great politeness and sympathy for their brave brethren in the Massachusetts, agreed to go that night and send forward about 90 quarter casks, and before morning it was in motion, end quote. We read that letter. So you can go to 27th of June and hear me read it. Second footnote. This favorable intelligence apparently was contained in several letters and speeches from the chiefs of the Stockbridge Indians that were read in Congress on this date. The delegates, nevertheless, had reason to apprehend that the northern tribes might not be steadfast in their neutrality, for other reports indicated that royal officers were already meeting with some success in their efforts to turn the Indians in New York and Canada against the Patriots. See George Washington to Schuyler, 25th of June, 1775, number 4. And Hancock to George Washington, 28th of June. I believe we read both of those, so you can go to those dates. Go to the videos that I recorded reading those letters on those dates. With those other reports in mind, Congress resolved on the 1st of July that if any Indians were induced to commit actual hostilities against these colonies or to enter into an offensive alliance with the British troops, end quote, the colonies should retaliate by making alliances, quote, with such Indian nations as will enter into the same to oppose such British troops and their Indian allies, end quote. For the American efforts to persuade the northern Indians to remain neutral, see in particular George Washington to Schuyler, 20th of August, 1775, and Schuyler to George Washington, 27th of August, 1775. I guess we'll get there when we get there. Footnote number 3. George Washington was appointed on 14th of June to the committee that was charged with drafting, quote, rules and regulations for the government of the Army, end quote, and he apparently attended at least one meeting of that committee before leaving Congress. Those rules and regulations, or Articles of War as they are usually called, were finally approved by Congress on 30th of June. For the Articles of War, adopted by the Massachusetts Provincial Congress on 5th April 1775, for the use of that colony's troops, see Massachusetts Province Congressional Journals 120-29. The Continental Articles of War include an additional 16 articles relating to furloughs, musters and returns, sutlers, pardons, and personal effects of deceased officers and enlisted men, and the signing of the articles by all members of the Army. The Continental Articles also define more specifically the punishments imposed by court-martials than do the Massachusetts Articles. For Congress's instructions to Schuyler regarding Canada, see Hancock to George Washington. That was number 4, footnote number 4. Number 5. On 19th of July, Congress appointed a committee, quote, to report the method of establishing a hospital, end quote, and 8 days later it approved the creation of an hospital for an army consisting of 20,000 men, end quote. William Shippen Jr., professor of anatomy in the medical school of the College of Philadelphia, was Richard Henry Lee's brother-in-law. George Washington visited Shippen's house on several occasions while attending the First and Second Continental Congress. Shippen was appointed in July 1776 to be chief physician for the militia units from Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland that were formed into a flying camp. In November 1776, he assumed responsibility for the Continental Army's sick and wounded west of the Hudson River. He became Director General of all Continental Army hospitals in April 1777. The 3 young surgeons may be those who were met at Cambridge in early August. See George Washington to Committee of the Massachusetts Council, 4th of August, 1775. If you know what a flying camp is, please leave a comment and let me know, because I'm not sure what that means. And finally, let's have a look at the New York Provincial Congress, to the New York delegates, to the Continental Congress. Great, okay. Let's start at the beginning. In Provincial Congress, New York, June 29th, 1775. Gentlemen, deeply impressed with the importance, the utility, and necessity of an accommodation with our parent state, and conscious that the best service we can render to the present and all future generations must consist in promoting it, we have labored without intermission to point out such moderate terms as may tend to reconcile the unhappy differences which threaten the whole empire with destruction. We now take the liberty of enclosing to you the result of our deliberations, and although we have not the presumption to suppose that our weak ideas on this momentous subject will be entirely approved by you, much less by that august body of which you are members, yet we take leave to observe that the breach hath been much widened since our first dispute on the subject of taxation, and that as this was the source of all our grievances, so we have the hope that the temptations being taken away, our civil and religious and political rights will be easily adjusted and confirmed. You will observe, gentlemen, that by a resolution of the House subjoined to the report of our committee, we consider the whole as entirely subjected to your better judgment, and each article as far independent of every other as you may think most proper or strike through convenient. We must now repeat to you the common and just observation that contests for liberty, fostered in their infancy by the virtuous and wise, become sources of power to wicked and designing men, from whence it follows that such controversies as we are now engaged in frequently end in the demolition of those rights and privileges which they were instituted to defend. We pray you therefore to use every effort for the compromising of this unnatural quarrel between the parent and child, and if such terms as you may think best shall not be complied with, earnestly to labor that at least some terms may be held up, whereby a treaty shall be set on foot to restore peace and harmony to our country, and spare the further effusion of human blood, so that if even at the last our well-meant endeavors shall fail to effect, we may stand fair and unreproachable by our own conscience in the last solemn appeal to the God of battles. We are, gentlemen, your most obedient and humble servant, by order, P.V.B. Livingston, President, to the New York delegates in Continental Congress. Okay. A draft of this letter to the delegates was adopted on 28th of June, and directions were given that 2 copies of the letter be signed by the President of the Provincial Congress. 1 copy was to be dispatched by express to Philadelphia on 29th of June, while the other was to be carried to the Continental Congress by Francis Lewis, one of the colony's delegates, by the delegates' reply of 6th of July. Oh, for the delegates' reply of 6th July, see, and then there's a reference. Okay. First footnote, number 1. On 2nd of June, 1775, the Provincial Congress named 14 members to a committee to draft a plan of accommodation between Britain and the colonies. This committee reported its draft plan on 24th of June. Debates on the proposal began that day and concluded on the 27th of June, when the amended plan was adopted. For details of the revisions made in the draft during debate, see below. Governor Morris to J.J. 30th of June, 1775. Number 2. The concluding paragraph read, "Resolved that no one article of the aforegoing report be considered preliminary to another, so as to preclude an accommodation without such article, and that no part of the said report be deemed binding or obligatory upon the representatives of this colony in Continental Congress." And then number 3, just a reminder of who he was. Peter Van Brugge Livingston, Sarah Livingston Jay's uncle, was a prominent New York merchant. Okay, those are the letters for the 29th of June, 1775. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.